The mountains of Dracoria rose like jagged teeth into the sky, their peaks covered with clouds that glowed pink and gold in the early morning light. Below, vast valleys stretched wide, filled with forests and rivers, but the highest cliffs were home to the dragons. These creatures were ancient, proud, and fiercely protective of their young. No human had ever been allowed near a dragon nest, and most who had tried left quickly, terrified or injured by the dragon's watchful eyes. Leo, a young human mechanic, climbed carefully along a narrow ridge, carrying a small pack of tools and supplies. He had heard stories of dragons since he was a child, tales of their power, intelligence, and strict rules. But he also knew that baby dragons were vulnerable, and sometimes accidents happened. His goal was simple: observe and learn, and if possible help without frightening the creatures. He knew the dragons would not trust him, but he believed humans had something special: patience, cleverness, and understanding that could make a difference. The wind whipped around him, strong and cold, as he reached a plateau just below a cliff. In the center, a nest lay among jagged rocks. Inside, tiny dragons stirred. Their scales shimmered in shades of green, gold, and blue, and their eyes blinked curiously at the sky. Leo froze, careful not to make any sudden movements. He remembered every lesson he had learned about approaching wild creatures. Slow gestures, quiet breathing, and no direct staring. From a distance, he watched the parent dragons soaring above. They were massive, with wings that stretched wider than a small house and claws that could snap boulders in two. They circled high in the air, watching every movement in the valley below. Their eyes were sharp, intelligent, and wary. They knew he was there. They had seen humans before, but none had ever tried to get close to their young. Leo's heart beat fast, but he did not move. He knew that any mistake could put the hatchlings in danger, or him. The baby dragons shifted in the nest. Most of them curled together, wings tucked tightly as if afraid of the strange human. But one hatchling, smaller and shinier than the others, peeked over the edge of the nest. Its bright amber eyes met Leo's, and for a moment, it seemed to study him as carefully as he studied it. He held his breath. "Easy," he whispered to himself. "I won't hurt you." Slowly, he placed a small piece of food, dried fruits and some protein cubes, on a flat rock near the nest. He stepped back, giving the babies room. The other hatchlings hissed softly and shuffled back into the nest, but the small amber-eyed dragon edged closer. Leo's heart raced. He had never expected this level of trust from a creature whose kind had never allowed humans near. The parent dragons swooped lower for a moment, letting out low roars that echoed against the cliffs. Leo froze again. They were warning him to stay back. But the little hatchling did not retreat. It stretched its tiny wings and took a cautious step toward the rock. Then another. Leo stayed perfectly still, letting the hatchling approach the food. Finally, it touched the edge with its claw, sniffing carefully. Then, as if deciding he was not a threat, it nuzzled its snout against the rock where the food rested. Leo exhaled slowly, relieved. One small dragon had accepted his presence. Over the next few days, Leo camped nearby, observing from a safe distance. He noted how the baby dragons reacted to sunlight, how they communicated with chirps and gentle hisses, and how the parent dragons guided them from above. He took careful notes and sketched diagrams of the nest and the surrounding rocks. But most importantly, he learned to move slowly and deliberately, never making sudden motions that could alarm the dragons. Each day, the small amber-eyed hatchling grew bolder. Leo named it Ember. Ember would peek over the nest edge, watch him quietly, and sometimes approach the food he left. It was a slow process, but trust was being built. Leo understood that he could not force a relationship. He could only offer patience and respect, and let the hatchling decide to accept him. One evening, a sudden gust of wind nearly knocked Leo off the ridge. He grabbed onto a rock, heart pounding, and noticed Ember tumbling slightly in the nest, wobbling on the edge. Without thinking, he reached out a hand, steadying the small dragon with gentle pressure. Ember chirped softly and pressed its tiny body against his hand. Leo froze for a moment, amazed. No dragon had ever touched a human before. The parent dragons circled above, giving low, questioning roars. Leo slowly withdrew his hand, careful not to frighten anyone. Ember stayed calm, looking up at him with trust in its eyes. That night, as the sun set behind the cliffs, Leo sat near the nest, marveling at the connection he had begun to form. It was quiet and small, but it was real. He knew this was only the beginning. Humans had always been seen as outsiders, weak and clever in ways dragons could not understand. But with patience, care, and ingenuity, a bond could be formed. Ember had shown the first spark of trust, and Leo was determined to nurture it, proving that humans could be allies, not threats. The mountains were still, except for the gentle rustling of wings and the soft chirps of the hatchlings. Leo looked up at the stars, thinking of all the challenges ahead. Protecting and learning from dragons would not be easy. But he had a chance to change something old and unbreakable, the idea that humans could never be near dragon young. Ember curled up in the nest, its small body warm and trusting. Leo packed his tools for the night, planning for another day of careful observation. The first step had been taken. The forbidden nest had been approached, and a single dragon had reached out to a human. A small spark of friendship had begun, a spark that might one day grow into a bridge between species, built on patience, care, and human ingenuity. Above, the parent dragons continued their watch, aware of the human below. Leo smiled faintly, knowing that tomorrow he would try again, slowly and carefully, earning the trust of the other hatchlings and perhaps even the adults. For now, the mountains were quiet, the nest safe, and a small human mechanic had begun a story that no one had thought possible. The morning sun broke over the mountains, casting golden light across the cliffs and valleys. Leo awoke in his small camp, careful not to disturb the dragons above. Ember, the tiny amber-eyed hatchling, peeked over the edge of the nest as soon as he stirred. Its eyes met his, curious and unafraid. Leo smiled softly, knowing that trust was fragile and had to be handled with care. He moved slowly, placing a few pieces of dried food on a flat rock near the nest. The other baby dragons stayed hidden, watching cautiously from the nest. They chirped softly to each other, unsure of the human below. The parent dragons circled above, wings glinting in the sunlight, eyes sharp and alert. Leo stayed low, keeping his movements gentle and deliberate. He spoke in soft tones, words the dragons could not understand but could feel through his calm voice. Ember tilted its head, studying him. Then, with a cautious step, it moved closer to the food. Its tiny claws tapped the rock softly. Leo froze, holding his breath. One wrong move and the hatchling might retreat, or worse, alert its parents. But Ember's curiosity outweighed its fear. It sniffed the food, then carefully pressed its small body against Leo's hand. Leo's heart skipped a beat. No human had ever been touched by a dragon hatchling before. Slowly, he extended his hand further, letting Ember climb onto his arm. The hatchling's tiny claws were gentle, and it pressed its small head against his sleeve. Leo stayed perfectly still, careful not to frighten it. Ember chirped softly, a sound of trust, and Leo whispered back, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The parent dragons flew lower, gliding over the nest in warning circles. Leo held his ground, calm and steady. He knew he had to show patience. Any sudden movement could end the fragile trust he was building. Ember, however, did not retreat. It climbed higher on his arm, pressing against him as if to say that it accepted his presence. Leo smiled faintly, realizing this small gesture was extraordinary. Over the next several hours, Leo remained near the nest, carefully observing the dragons. Ember stayed close, exploring his hands and arms, nuzzling gently. The other hatchlings began to peek out, curious about the unusual scene. They chirped softly to Ember, but none dared approach. Leo understood that each dragon had to accept him on its own terms. Trust could not be forced, it had to be earned. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small cloth, folding it carefully and placing it near the nest. Ember crawled onto it immediately, feeling safe and secure. Leo watched, taking notes quietly. The baby dragon's behavior amazed him. Dragons were known for their independence and pride, but here was one choosing to connect with a human. That small act of trust was a breakthrough. Days passed. Leo maintained the same routine: quiet observation, gentle movements, and offering small bits of food. Ember grew more comfortable, exploring his hands, arms, and even his shoulder. Occasionally, the hatchling chirped happily, making soft noises that sounded almost like laughter. Leo laughed softly too, careful not to make sudden sounds that might alarm the others. One afternoon, a sudden gust of wind swept across the cliffs, rattling the nest. Ember squeaked and stumbled slightly, but Leo caught it gently, steadying the tiny body. The other hatchlings watched silently, and even the parent dragons circled lower, alert. Leo held Ember close, whispering softly, "It's okay. You're safe." The hatchling pressed against him, relaxed in his arms. It was a moment of pure connection, and Leo knew that the bond they were forming was growing stronger. That evening, Leo set up a small observation post near the nest. He brought in more supplies: soft cloths for comfort, food for nourishment, and small tools to create safe perches. Ember explored each item with curiosity, climbing and testing them. Leo stayed patient, learning every little habit and movement of the hatchling. He realized that understanding a dragon required observation, patience, and attention to detail, skills humans possessed in abundance. The other hatchlings began to approach cautiously over time, encouraged by Ember's trust. They sniffed the air, chirped to each other, and in small steps inched closer to Leo. He offered his hands, keeping movements slow and calm. Each new dragon that accepted his presence was a victory, a sign that patience and kindness could overcome fear. Leo also observed how the parent dragons reacted. They stayed circling above, occasionally dipping closer to monitor their young. Their eyes were sharp, intelligent, and careful. Leo understood that he had to continue showing respect and caution. Any misstep could end the fragile relationship. Yet, with each day he noticed their wariness slowly easing, a subtle acknowledgement that this human was different from the others. By the end of the week, Leo and Ember had formed a bond that was unmistakable. Ember followed him around the nest, nuzzling, climbing, and chirping happily. The baby dragon's trust was complete, and Leo felt a sense of pride and awe. He had achieved something humans had never done. A small bridge between species built on patience, understanding, and gentle care. The mountains of Dracoria were quiet that night, except for the soft rustle of wings and the gentle chirps of the hatchlings. Leo sat near the nest, watching Ember curl up safely. He reflected on the events of the past days. Trust had been slow to build, but now it was strong. Humans might be small and underestimated, but their patience, intelligence, and kindness could form bonds that even the most proud dragons could recognize. Leo knew there was still work ahead. The other hatchlings and even the adult dragons would take more time to accept him fully. But the unexpected encounter with Ember had proven that connection was possible. One small act of trust could open doors thought forever closed. And Leo, the human mechanic, had become the first step in a new story, one where humans and dragons could understand each other, work together, and form bonds that no one had imagined before. As the stars appeared above the cliffs, Leo carefully packed his tools, leaving the nest undisturbed. Ember blinked at him, then nuzzled his hand before curling up to sleep. The human boy smiled softly, knowing that this small dragon had chosen him as a friend. The mountains were still, the nest safe, and a remarkable friendship had begun, one that might change the way humans and dragons saw each other forever. The sun rose slowly over the jagged peaks of Dracoria, painting the cliffs with gold and pink light. Leo packed his small satchel carefully, checking the food and soft cloths he would use near the nest. Today he would spend the entire day with Ember, the tiny amber-eyed hatchling who had already begun to trust him. He moved cautiously along the rocky ridge, careful not to startle the parent dragons circling above. Ember peeked over the edge of the nest as Leo approached. Its small wings fluttered slightly, excitement and curiosity shining in its eyes. Leo smiled and spoke softly. "Good morning, Ember. Ready for another day?" The hatchling chirped happily, pressing gently against his arm as he reached out. Leo held still, letting Ember explore his hand and forearm. The other hatchlings peeked out occasionally but remained cautious, watching every movement with wide eyes. Over the next hours, Leo worked patiently to build trust with the baby dragons. He moved slowly, offering small pieces of food and allowing them to approach on their own terms. Ember climbed onto his shoulder, pressing its tiny body against his neck, chirping softly. Leo laughed quietly. "You're brave, aren't you?" he whispered. The little dragon chirped again, nuzzling him. The other hatchlings began to inch closer, encouraged by Ember's trust. One by one they stepped to the edge of the nest, curious but still wary. Leo kept his movements deliberate and calm, extending his hands and arms slowly to let them explore. He knew that forcing the dragons would break the trust they were forming, so he let them decide how close they wanted to get. As the day went on, Leo learned more about dragon behavior. He noticed how they responded to light, how they communicated through chirps, hisses, and wing gestures, and how the parent dragons guided their young from above. He documented everything, sketching notes and patterns carefully. The dragon's intelligence was clear in every movement, but Leo also realized that humans had a unique ability: patience and observation. He could watch, learn, and adapt, forming connections that others could not. Around midday, a sudden gust of wind shook the cliffside. The nest rocked slightly and the hatchlings scrambled. Ember squeaked and fluttered, but Leo reached out quickly and steadied the tiny dragon. He held it gently, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe." Ember pressed its head against his chest, chirping softly. The other hatchlings watched silently, and even the parent dragons circled lower, alert and cautious. That afternoon Leo tried something new. He placed a small perch near the nest, made from soft cloth and light rods, creating a safe place for the hatchlings to climb. Ember climbed immediately, exploring every part of the perch. Leo observed the movements carefully, adjusting the rods and cloth to make it more comfortable and secure. One by one, the other hatchlings approached, encouraged by Ember's example. They climbed the perch slowly, testing their trust in the human below. The parent dragons continued to observe, swooping occasionally to warn Leo to stay back. He remained calm, showing them through patience and careful movements that he meant no harm. Over time, their vigilance seemed to soften, a subtle acknowledgement that this human was different. Leo understood that trust had to extend to the adults as well, and he was willing to wait. By late afternoon, Ember had begun to explore more freely, climbing onto Leo's arms, shoulders, and even resting briefly on his head. The other hatchlings followed, testing his reactions. Leo remained steady, speaking softly and moving slowly. Each gentle touch, each careful gesture reinforced the trust that had begun days ago. It was a delicate balance, but one that was slowly strengthening. Leo also noticed how the hatchlings responded to his voice. Soft words seemed to calm them, and steady breathing reassured them. He learned to synchronize his movements with theirs, matching their pace and energy. It was a dance of trust, one that required patience and careful observation. Humans, he realized, had an advantage here, the ability to think, adapt, and understand behavior over time. As evening approached, the sky turning shades of orange and purple, Leo and Ember sat quietly near the nest. The little dragon rested its tiny body against him, blinking sleepily. The other hatchlings were nearby, exploring but staying cautious. Leo watched the stars begin to appear above the mountains, reflecting on the progress of the day. One small hatchling's trust had grown into a bond, and that bond was spreading to others. He packed his tools slowly, careful not to startle the dragons. Ember climbed onto his shoulder one last time, chirping softly as if to say goodbye for the day. Leo smiled and whispered, "See you tomorrow, Ember. We'll take it one step at a time." The baby dragon nuzzled him gently before returning to the nest. The parent dragon circled above briefly before settling back into the sky, still alert but less tense than before. Leo knew that building trust with dragons would take time, patience, and careful observation. But he had learned an important lesson. Humans could achieve what others could not by being patient, clever, and respectful. Ember's trust had opened a door that had been closed for centuries, and Leo was determined to continue walking through it, step by step. The mountains were quiet that night, except for the soft rustle of wings and the gentle chirps of the hatchlings. Leo sat near the nest, watching Ember curl up safely among its siblings. He understood that the day's progress was only possible because he had acted with patience and intelligence, respecting the dragon's instincts and nature. The tiny sparks of trust he had helped build would grow stronger with time. As the stars twinkled above, Leo reflected on what he had achieved. The hatchlings, once wary and distant, were beginning to accept him. Ember's boldness had led the way, showing that even proud, independent creatures could recognize care and patience. Humans might be small and underestimated, but their ingenuity and willingness to observe, adapt, and respect others gave them a unique strength. The night air was calm, and Leo packed his remaining tools carefully. He looked at Ember sleeping in the nest, its small chest rising and falling peacefully. Tomorrow would be another day of careful observation and gentle guidance. The bond between human and dragon was growing, and he knew that patience, respect, and intelligence would allow it to deepen even further. In the quiet of the mountain, with stars shining overhead, a remarkable connection had begun. One human, patient and clever, had earned the trust of a baby dragon, and slowly that trust was spreading to others. It was the start of something extraordinary, proof that humans, with their ingenuity and patience, could bridge gaps that had never been crossed before. The morning sky was heavy with clouds, gray and full of rain, as Leo climbed carefully toward the dragon nest. He carried extra cloths, food, and some simple tools he had crafted to help the hatchlings. Yesterday, Ember had been particularly curious, exploring the edges of the nest and even venturing a short distance onto a nearby rock. Today, Leo hoped to continue building trust, but the dark clouds hinted that the day might bring more than observation. As he approached, he saw Ember peeking over the edge of the nest. The little dragon's wings trembled slightly as a gust of wind swept through the cliffs. The other hatchlings pressed closer together, chirping nervously. Leo crouched low, speaking softly. "It's okay. I'm here and I won't let anything happen to you." Ember chirped back and moved closer to his hand. Suddenly the wind grew stronger, whipping across the plateau with unexpected force. The nest shifted slightly and some of the hatchlings stumbled. Leo's heart raced. The parent dragons circled lower, giving low, warning roars. The storm was approaching quickly, and the nest perched on a narrow ledge was at risk. Leo knew he had to act carefully but swiftly. He set down his satchel and pulled out the cloths and rods he had brought. Using his small tools, he began creating a temporary shelter over the nest. He draped cloth carefully, anchoring it to rocks and folding it so the hatchlings would be protected from the wind and rain. Ember climbed onto his arm, chirping nervously. Leo whispered, "I've got you. You'll be safe." He worked steadily, moving slowly to avoid startling the young dragons. The other hatchlings began to move toward the temporary shelter as Leo finished securing it. He adjusted the cloths to form gentle walls that would block the wind while allowing the hatchlings to breathe and see their parents above. The parent dragons circled tightly overhead, wings beating against the gusts. Leo could feel their tension, but he knew he was doing the right thing. Rain began to fall in steady drops, soaking the rocks and making the ledge slippery. Ember shivered and chirped softly, pressing against Leo's arm. Leo held the tiny dragon close, speaking in quiet, calm tones. "It's okay, Ember. We'll stay safe." He gently placed the hatchling inside the shelter, making sure it was comfortable. One by one, the other hatchlings followed, each finding its place under the cloth walls he had constructed. The storm intensified. Strong winds and heavy rain battered the cliffside, but Leo stayed with the hatchlings, adjusting the shelter whenever necessary. The parent dragons swooped down briefly, scanning the area for threats. They could see Leo's careful movements and the way he protected their young. Slowly, their eyes softened, a subtle acknowledgement that this human was not a danger. Hours passed and the storm continued. Leo fed the hatchlings small pieces of food, making sure they had energy to stay warm and strong. Ember chirped happily, exploring the shelter and even climbing onto Leo's shoulder for comfort. Leo smiled. The tiny dragon's trust had carried through the challenge of the storm, and the bond between them had grown stronger. As the afternoon came, the storm began to ease. The clouds moved slowly across the sky and the rain lessened. Leo carefully inspected the shelter, ensuring it had held firm. The hatchlings chirped and stretched, wings fluttering in the fresh air. Ember nuzzled Leo's hand, a small gesture of gratitude and trust. The parent dragons circled lower, their eyes soft but watchful, acknowledging his help without aggression. Leo realized that the challenge had proven more than his ability to act quickly. It had shown the dragons that humans could be allies, clever and patient in the face of danger. His quick thinking and simple tools had protected the hatchlings when no one else could. Even the smallest gestures, careful observation, and thoughtful actions could make a difference. By evening, the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting golden light on the wet rocks. The hatchlings explored the nest again, moving confidently under the protection Leo had provided. Ember climbed onto his shoulder one last time, chirping softly as if to say thank you. Leo laughed quietly, stroking the tiny dragon's head. "You're welcome, Ember. You were very brave today." The parent dragons circled above, their wings casting shadows across the nest. They had seen the human act with patience, intelligence, and care. Slowly they began to ease their watch, allowing Leo a little more freedom near the hatchlings. The bond that had begun with Ember was spreading, hinting that the dragons might eventually accept humans as allies rather than threats. That night, Leo sat near the nest, watching Ember and the other hatchlings curl up under the shelter. The storm had tested them all, but they were safe and unharmed. Leo reflected on the day. Humans might be small and often underestimated, but they had ingenuity, patience, and courage that could protect and nurture even the mightiest creatures. Ember's trust had been tested, and it had remained strong, showing that bonds formed through patience and respect could endure any challenge. The stars shone above the cliffs, twinkling through the clearing clouds. Leo packed his remaining tools carefully, leaving the nest undisturbed. Ember blinked sleepily, pressing its tiny body against the cloth walls. Leo whispered softly, "Tomorrow we'll continue. One step at a time, Ember." The baby dragon chirped softly in response, a sound of contentment and trust. As Leo settled down near the nest for the night, he understood that the storm had done more than test the hatchlings, it had tested him as well. He had learned that human ingenuity was not just about tools or technology, but about careful observation, thoughtful action, and the courage to act when needed. The dragons had seen this firsthand, and the bond between species had grown stronger because of it. The mountains were calm, and the hatchlings slept safely under the shelter Leo had built. Ember curled up nearby, dreaming perhaps of flying and exploring, knowing the human mechanic would always be there to protect and guide. Leo looked up at the stars, thinking of the days ahead. He knew that more challenges would come, but he was ready. With patience, cleverness, and respect, Humans could achieve what others thought impossible, forming bonds that could change the future of dragons and humans alike. In the quiet of the mountain night, with the storm behind them, Leo felt a sense of pride and purpose. He had faced the challenge, kept the hatchlings safe, and deepened the trust that had begun days ago. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to grow that trust, and he was ready to meet them step by step, wing by wing, heart by heart. The sun rose slowly over the cliffs of Dracoria, bathing the mountains in warm golden light. Leo packed his small satchel, checking the supplies he had prepared for the hatchlings. The storm from the previous day had passed, leaving the nest and the surrounding cliffs damp but safe. Ember, the tiny amber-eyed dragon, peeked over the edge of the nest and chirped softly at him. Leo smiled and whispered, "Good morning, Ember. Ready for another day?" As Leo approached, Ember scrambled toward him, nuzzling his hand. The other hatchlings, emboldened by Ember's trust and the safety Leo had provided during the storm, edged closer as well. Their chirps were cautious at first, but curiosity had begun to outweigh fear. Leo held his hands out slowly, allowing each hatchling to approach on its own terms. One by one they explored his arms, shoulders, and even the top of his head. The parent dragons circled above, wings stretching wide, their eyes sharp but calm. Leo could feel their watchfulness, but he also sensed that their wariness had lessened. They had seen the human act with care, patience, and intelligence, and they were beginning to understand that he was not a threat. Leo knew that building trust with the parents would take time, but this was an important first step. Leo spent the morning creating small perches and safe spaces around the nest. Using cloth, rods, and gentle supports, he built places where the hatchlings could climb, rest, and play without risk of falling or being swept away by the wind. Ember was the first to explore, climbing carefully and testing each perch. Leo watched closely, making adjustments to ensure stability. The other hatchlings followed, slowly but confidently. By midday, the hatchlings were exploring freely, chirping happily as they moved between the perches. Ember often returned to Leo, brushing against him or nuzzling his shoulder. The other hatchlings were more cautious, but Leo remained patient, letting them approach at their own pace. He spoke softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's okay. You're safe here." Each gentle word and careful movement reinforced the trust they were building. Suddenly, one of the parent dragons swooped closer, landing on a nearby ledge. Its eyes studied Leo carefully, and its wings folded slightly. The hatchlings froze, chirping softly, but Leo stayed calm. He held out a hand, showing the dragon that he meant no harm. Ember climbed onto his shoulder, chirping happily. The parent dragon tilted its head, watching the display of trust. Slowly, it lowered itself and allowed its other hatchlings to explore the perches Leo had built. Leo realized that this was a turning point. The dragons were beginning to see humans not as intruders or threats, but as allies. His careful observation, patience, and small acts of ingenuity had proven that humans could act with respect, intelligence, and courage. Ember's trust had led the way, showing that even proud, independent dragons could recognize kindness and competence. In the afternoon, Leo decided to test his influence further. He created a small obstacle course with the perches and soft cloth bridges, encouraging the hatchlings to explore and play safely. Ember led the way, demonstrating the route to the others. Leo guided them gently, adjusting supports and offering encouragement. The dragons responded with growing confidence, exploring freely and learning to trust both the environment and the human mechanic. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting warm orange light across the cliffs, Leo took a moment to observe the nest. The hatchlings were playful and confident, Ember perched proudly on his shoulder. The parent dragons circled above but did not swoop down aggressively. Instead, they watched carefully, understanding that this human had earned their respect. Leo smiled quietly. Humans were small, often underestimated, but their patience, intelligence, and cleverness gave them strength that even dragons could acknowledge. That evening, Leo fed the hatchlings, letting Ember and the others climb onto his arms for comfort while eating. The parent dragons remained nearby, wings folded, observing but not interfering. Leo spoke softly, "You're safe, Ember? And all of you too. Humans can be your friends, not your enemies." Ember chirped in agreement, brushing against his neck, while the other hatchlings explored more boldly. Over the next few days, Leo continued his careful work. He repaired minor damages to the nest, adjusted perches, and introduced small toys made from safe materials. Ember led the other hatchlings in exploration, showing them that humans could be trusted. The parent dragons gradually allowed him closer access, occasionally landing on nearby ledges to observe his work more directly. Trust, once so fragile, was now growing stronger across the entire nest. Leo also noticed a change in the dragons' behavior. They began to communicate more openly with the hatchlings and subtly with him. Low chirps, soft hisses, and wing gestures conveyed messages of caution, approval, and curiosity. Leo learned to respond in kind, using gentle movements, calm tones, and patient observation to interact with both young and adult dragons. He realized that humans had a special skill, the ability to observe, learn, and adapt. This was a kind of ingenuity that even dragons, with all their strength and pride, could respect. By the end of the week, Leo had become a true ally to the dragons. The hatchlings climbed on him confidently, Ember staying close almost constantly. The parent dragons circled the nest but allowed him to move freely, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Leo had shown that humans could act with patience, cleverness, and courage, earning a place alongside creatures that had once considered them outsiders. The mountains of Dracoria were calm as night fell. Leo sat near the nest, Ember resting on his shoulder and the other hatchlings curled safely in the perches he had built. The parent dragons circled above, wings reflecting the starlight, but their eyes were soft, not aggressive. Leo realized that humans, though small and often underestimated, had a unique strength. Through patience, observation, and ingenuity, they could earn trust, protect the vulnerable, and form alliances that others might never imagine. As the stars twinkled in the sky, Leo looked at Ember and whispered, "We did it, little one. You and I, we've shown them that humans can be friends." Ember chirped softly, nuzzling his neck. The other hatchlings chirped in agreement, exploring their surroundings with confidence. Leo smiled quietly. Trust had been built, bonds had been formed, and a bridge between species had been created. The parent dragons slowly landed near the nest, wings folding gracefully. They observed Leo and the hatchlings, acknowledging him with subtle gestures of respect. Leo understood that the dragons had accepted him as an ally. It was not just about fixing or observing, it was about showing intelligence, patience, and courage in a way that earned their trust. Humans could achieve extraordinary things through these quiet, clever actions. That night, as Leo packed his tools and prepared to rest, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Ember curled up beside him, and the other hatchlings were safe and calm. The dragons had begun to see humans differently, and Leo had proven that small, patient, and clever actions could create bonds even across species that had never connected before. The mountains were silent under the starlit sky, except for the soft breathing of dragons and the gentle rustle of wings. Leo looked up, thinking about the future. He knew that many challenges lay ahead, but he also knew that humans, with their patience, ingenuity, and courage, could overcome them. He had become a true ally to dragons, bridging the gap between species and showing that friendship and trust could exist even where fear and pride had ruled for centuries. Ember blinked sleepily on his shoulder, a small but powerful reminder of what humans could achieve. Leo whispered softly, "Tomorrow we continue. Together." The little dragon chirped in agreement, and the parent dragons watched from above, wings folded, trust slowly blossoming. Humans had earned a place in the dragon world, not through strength or fire, but through intelligence, care, and quiet courage. And in the quiet of Dracoria's mountains, a new chapter had begun. One where humans were no longer outsiders but allies, friends, and protectors of dragons, capable of achieving what many had thought impossible.